And if we have different intuitive abilities, a lot of for my work as an empath and empathic clients, it's if we just are treating every emotion like it's ours to process, we're never going to stop processing. Like for empathic
Mhm.
people, it's like we have to first be like, is this even mine or not mine? If it's not mine to process. It's not mine to like cry about, journal, keep moving through. Cause like the world has a lot of stuff to process. Like we're never going to
Yeah,
stop doing that. I don't believe
right.
we're here to like absorb the collective suffering. It's more of like, is there something more than me? Is there life after death? Like, is there a
Hmm.
loving source? And you're getting into philosophy and pros and cons and rational reasons. Spiritual awakening experiences is it might be one or a series of experiences where it's not rational, it's not logical anymore. It's like you experience something that you cannot unknow.
I'd like to welcome to the Journeying Soul, author of Toxic Spirituality, Katie Turner.
Mhm,
Nicely with the
mhm.
little
There's a
in
little,
the
little asterisk instead of the U. So,
and so let's just go down that list of
mhm.
things that people need to beware of.
One of the main premises of the book is we are, even if we are spiritual beings, like I believe we are, I've experienced that we are still in a human, like we're spiritual beings having a human experience, and we cannot, like, they're both true at the same time. And
Hmm.
so we need to attend to both. Like, it's not about one or the other. And wherever somebody is at, like, different layers of those may need more attention at that point in their journey. And so when we get too far on either end of just spirituality or only human, we can run into problems. And
Hmm.
so I think my main like question or reason for writing the book was there were so many times over and over again with people I would just be like, well, how would you know? Like there's no guidebook for this. There's no one to talk to. Like if you Google this, like it's of course you there's so few people you can talk to about this, and then to weed out like who is actually credible to talk to, and even well-meaning people in that space, it's like, oh, just like think positive and manifest. It's like this is not trauma informed. Like that doesn't
Hmm.
help someone. They cannot think their way out of a trauma reaction. They actually need safety, stability, grounding. The
Hmm.
amount of times I've seen people have to almost choose between their spiritual support system or get really almost like gaslit. There's things that we don't do great socially and don't do great in humans, like even spiritual spaces of like holding space for hard emotions,
Yeah.
for chronic illness, grief, loss. Like spiritual tools aren't to bypass and be like, oh, like I just get to hit the easy button on human and I don't have to feel sad, I don't have to feel hard, like I can control life and death, I can control all these things. It's like,
Hmm.
no, this just makes it easier to navigate what's coming. It makes us easier to see what can, like, where do we have some free will and autonomy, and where are we actually, our free will is choosing how we're responding through this. And there's like soul lessons, there's deeper things. And even if there's soul lessons, like, it doesn't say, like, oh, well, now you don't get to feel sad about this now. Like, there's real human emotions in it.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
there's, yeah.
It's like you can't live in a constant state of transcendence. You're not transcending every problem into this spiritual realm the
And maybe
second it
that's
happens.
possible, but I think if it is, it's a result of
Ah,
engaging in a process where you just arrive there. Like, I'm not there. I don't know anyone who's authentically there. I'm not saying it isn't possible, but I don't think we
mhm.
get there by being like, no, I'm not looking at this, like, shove it underground.
Yeah, I mean, if you believe everything in history, we've had very few figures in history who have
Hmm.
lived as completely transcendent people who, while
Hmm.
I mean, I come from a Catholic background, a lot of
Hmm.
people, a lot of Christians in this world, and to have a figure who's on the cross saying forgive them, that's pretty
Hmm.
transcendent, but that's
Yeah.
not most of us. And you
Yeah.
also you also touched on something that I completely agree with, which is what I often describe as just, I don't want to be negative about it, but I call it like
Hmm.
the problems of being in an incarnate body. Like if you're in your
Hmm.
body, there are things that we need to maintain
Hmm.
the incarnation. And those things
Yeah.
are food, fire, water, shelter, air. They
Yeah.
tend to come first. So,
Yeah.
and we're in them, we're in these bodies, we're incarnate for whatever reason. So
Hmm.
as you were saying, we're just not spiritual beings. We're
Hmm.
also incarnate in this realm. And if you believe that like we're just a little piece of our bigger soul, whatever. We are
Mm-hmm.
limited in this part now.
Mm-hmm.
You also touched on something that I did want to dive into, because some of
Mm-hmm.
the subject that I talk about on the podcast is manifestation. I'm about to do a
Mm-hmm.
big thing
Mm-hmm.
on it. And you said some things that I was just like, amen, sister. You know, well,
Mm-hmm.
specifically, you said, when people dive into capitalist consumerism dressed up in spiritual clothing, it makes me bananas when people are just like, I just want to manifest stuff.
Yeah.
I can have all the stuff if I just manifest right.
Yeah. And it's just even being aware that like that is infused into a lot of these, like a lot of different coaches teaching. Most people have gone to some kind of workshop or inspirational where it's like the check and the house and chanting. It's like, again, like the ego is supposed to serve the soul, not dictate. And when we get into that space, it's like our ego dictating, like, I need all these things to feel safe, to feel secure. Like if I have all this money, all this stuff that I can't run out of, like I will be safe. And it's really souls in the driver's seat. It's not really material part can be part of that. And it for some people, it is part of their thing. We can work on belief systems. We can work on like learning the money side. But there's also
Mhm.
parts where sometimes that'll guide us to actually, it isn't about money. And it's about when that safety and security is like our actual connection with that divine within us. We don't actually need to have this all the time. We can trust that we have enough and will have enough.
You said the line,
Mhm.
that one of the lines that I wrote down from your book that I loved, which is the ego
Mhm.
is to serve the soul.
Mhm.
I've spoken with so many people when we're talking about meditation and all sorts of suffering, how the ego is the problem. The ego
It's
causes
not,
so much
yeah.
trouble. And you were the first one that I think I've spoken to that really put it just in the right place, where it's like
Mhm.
it's not about always shutting up the ego and
Mhm.
shutting down the ego. The ego has a purpose,
Mhm.
but it is supposed to be, the ego's supposed to serve the soul. Like that's the
Yeah.
healthy balance right there. And I thank you for that, because I was like, that's how I want to be thinking about it. You
Thank
can't,
you.
it's
Yeah.
like, what's my ego doing? And is it serving
Mhm.
my soul?
Yeah, and I know
Um,
I can't take credit for that. Even Albert Einstein has a famous quote of the intuitive mind is the sacred gift and the rational mind is the faithful servant. We've created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. And I see that a lot too in kind of spiritual spaces of like this demonizing of the ego. And the ego helps us be human, like it executes things. But it's like the ego can also relax when there is this higher order, like intuitive piece of like the ego will get to know what it needs to know when it's time for it to, and then it can like execute the business plan. It can review the finances, like it can take care of the physical world part of our goals,
mhm,
but it's more grounded. It's not controlling, like having to predict everything, having to know, like make all those decisions in the quantum field of like what do we feel called to, where do we have energy, what feels like soul purpose. Like it gets to actually relax and just focus on what it's really good at.
mhm. Like I said, I'm going to be thinking about it differently. So,
Yeah.
another thing you touched on that I was in my notes too was you were
Mhm.
talking about, um, that it's the toxic spirituality idea of trying to bypass grief and suffering, not
Mhm.
just your own, but also in not being able to offer condolences and support to other people going through it. It's
Yeah,
almost, I
like
don't know if,
empathy or hold space for people
yeah,
when
it's
that's what they
almost,
really need then.
yeah, it's almost like
Yeah.
if people, and I think many of us who have gone down a spiritual exploration path have run into people who in their spiritual journey
Mhm.
get very judgy for
Mhm.
somebody else.
Yeah.
Why are they so depressed about their loss? Why are they sick? There must be something, they have failed in their spiritual perfection somehow. And
Mhm.
it's like
Yeah, yeah.
a
I
little
see
bit
that a
of,
lot too, and I see it a lot impacting the people I work with as well too, like in many different ways and forms. Yeah.
uh,
Like it's kind of this again of like if you get this right spiritually, like you can control these things that are not the ego's job to control.
you also, there's a huge section here on
Mhm.
quick fixes and miracle
Mhm.
cures. I have
Mhm.
a lot of notes here.
Yeah.
But most important thing I think you noted, which is that illness, disability, and death, these are not failures.
Mhm.
These are just, what would you call them? Inflection points? I mean, it's
Yeah.
like they obviously,
Yeah, again, because I think it's that that piece of like, and again, I think there's holding this duality of like, yes, that for some people and their soul journey, that soul leading it, some people may have near-death experiences come back. Some people may be drawn to affirmations, whatever they do, and they're like, oh, I have this cure piece. But that ends up getting put on people where it's like, how do we hold the balance of like hope and actually supporting people going through things?
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is that we are all going to die. We're all going to experience like decline or death at some point
Mm-hmm.
or another. So again, and that's hard. Like there is even when you can hold both, and I kind of share in that it's like I have mediumship abilities now. It's like I've gotten, it's not uncommon for me to get visitations from loved ones who've passed, other things. It's like I know they're there, but you're still grieving them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's that element of like it's not, we have to get better at holding space for that and this mystery of like we won't always know the full workings of the soul. And even
Mm-hmm.
if we're connected, even if we're getting those messages are helpful for people when they're genuinely connected to that, when it's coming through for them. There can be huge comfort, reassurance with that. And again, the like duality of that, our heart can hold all this contradictory emotions. Our brain wants it one or the other. So we can have these like, and I mean, I've worked with people where they have, it's not uncommon, and I've had that experience myself. It's not uncommon in my practice when that genuinely comes through for people of like their own connection with their higher self, guides, like whatever they call it, that this message of source of like this really difficult person, like they were here to help your soul evolve. They were here to help you master this. They like this, that it was time for them to go. Like this is part of their soul time. They've done what they need to do in this lifetime. It's like that can be really healing and reassuring. And the human part of us still needs to feel like the rage to be like, yeah, and like abuse is not okay. And like these like terrible dynamics are not okay. I think that's part of our like soul and collective evolution too, is it's not just about, oh, like this is all fine, like let's like put our head in the sand and ignore some very serious issues.
Yeah.
um and just be like, because I've heard the crazy like I don't like using that word, but quote unquote craziest stuff come through of advice of even people's spiritual communities being like, oh, well, your kid signed up for this lesson with this like abusive co-parent. And I'm like, yeah, and no, like we need to talk to a lawyer, and like your lesson might be actually like shutting that down to the best of your ability, like fighting for
Yeah.
them. It's not just like, well, I guess like their soul signed up for it, so I'm going to leave them in this. No.
Yeah, yeah, that is not the it's so dismissive when
Yeah.
somebody spiritually says that, where it's like exactly, it's like you I think you talk about it as sort of restorative justice in a way in the
Yeah.
spiritual realm, where it's like, no, there are things that there we have slightly, I don't know where we are now. The world, it's
Mhm.
2025. The world is in a really strange little juncture right
Yeah.
now. But we had, evolved to some point where we had things like the Geneva Convention. And there were,
Hmm.
after World War II, yes, there were wars, but they have not been, we've not had another
Hmm.
world war. Things have been, we tried to evolve to make sure that
Hmm.
some damage that humanity kept doing over and over and
Hmm.
over again, we tried to do that less.
Hmm.
So, and that can happen in the smaller level, like you said, when you see
Hmm.
people be, I mean, let's put it 100 years ago, there was no child protective services. People could do
Hmm.
whatever they wanted.
Hmm.
It's still not perfect. It's still not solved. But if
Yeah.
the answer was not to say, people beat their kids. That was
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
those kids
Yeah.
signed up for a lesson. No, the answer was to create services and put in some mechanism. And
Hmm.
that's just one small example. But
Yeah, and it's like, how do we engage with these things so that we're still connected to that light within us, that love, but be a source for like, how do we evolve to be like, what's the calling to do, to keep evolving, to be doing better, to like really have that. I almost call it, it's like this energy of like warrior type energy, archangel energy, where it's like, yes, there's the love, the unconditional love is there, the nurturing is there, the seeing the good in people is there. And there's this like, and this is not okay. So what do we do about that? What action can we take? Um, and not being afraid to kind of fight for what's right from a place of like love and empowerment and boundaries.
Mhm. Absolutely. Mm, yes. Uh, um, I guess you also call that, looking at my, you also call that like ignoring real world feedback. But I know
Mhm.
that ignoring real world feedback extends beyond, I think, what we're talking about too. I mean, part of what you're saying
Mhm.
is responding to real world, but
Yeah, and I
also,
think that one is a bit about like there's like 2 points, and that's almost like an individual reflection too,
Yeah.
I believe. There's people who almost take too much literally of like everything that's happening outside of you is a reflection of you. So there's this
Mhm.
like I see, and I just worked with this with people so much where it's like, oh, this person's being so horrible to me. My partner's being so abusive. Like, where in I am I doing that? And like, where am I? And I'm like, no. Well, yeah, like we got to look at both sides. But if you're actually accountable, if you're trying everything you can to do this, we also have to look at sometimes the mirror back is not an exact mirror of like these are the exact qualities that are mirrored back, and the relationship one's a good one. If you're with someone who's emotionally immature, like their behavior is actually getting abusive, you are not equally engaging in that. It may be like, where are you actually putting up with that? Where are you giving your power away? Where are you feeling like it's your job to like just get like heal someone enough that then they're not abusive? It's like, no, they need to be accountable for that. And if they're not going to take accountability, we need to maybe look at our own childhood patterns, managing certain personality traits where we may tolerate too much. That's not okay. And then
Yeah.
there's
It's
others where they're just like, no, I'm just going to manifest and I'm not going to actually listen to anything that's coming. Like, I think that when I saw there's some video and some people are like, oh, I don't like this reality. So I'm just going to visualize a really like healthy relationship or me thriving at work. And they're not listening to their supervisor feedback, the feedback from their partner. It's like, nah, if this actually has some themes that keep coming up from everyone, you need to pay attention. Like, that is your key to evolve here.
well, it's something interesting that I think is going on now. Obviously, this podcast mostly goes out on YouTube, and because it's on YouTube, I watch a lot of YouTube videos, and
Mhm.
I have been, I guess I shouldn't say surprised, but I
Mhm.
see so many spiritually oriented videos on YouTube. There's no standard for any of
Mhm.
us publishing anything, very
Mhm.
few standards, just,
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
know, the basics. Like they
Mhm.
don't want obscenity and obviously no like pornography and
Yeah.
it's crazy stuff, no advocating
Yeah.
murder, like crazy,
Yeah. Yeah.
not uncrazy stuff, but people
Yeah.
beyond that can say anything. And it
Yeah.
reminds me when I see a lot of the videos out now that
Mhm.
in the spiritual realm, that it's almost like the fulfilling of what Carl Sagan said about people, um, like regressing into a superstitious type of world. But in the
Mhm.
spiritual realm, it's this idea that there's going to be this alternate earth, and you're a light
Mhm.
worker, and you're going to
Mhm.
again, we get back to the transcendent. You're just going to
Mhm.
transcend it all,
Mhm.
and it's going to happen last year. Oh no, it's going to happen 6 months after that. Oh, it's coming down the corner now. Oh, it's
Yeah.
going to
Yeah.
be a year from now. And then there's another realm of people where it's like the aliens are going to come and they're going to take care of it. It's
Yeah.
never the fact that we're here with the work in front of us, the human
Yeah.
work in front of us,
Yeah.
that has to be done. And it's like,
Mhm.
and the I'm just saying this because the when you're talking about some of your patients who are not responding to the thing, they think they're gonna, instead of responding to their boss's feedback, for example, they're going to just
Mine aren't like that.
somehow.
I see that out there, and I see that like from other people. Most of the people I work with are very engaged in their own work. Like they're the ones who are more likely to take way too much responsibility for everything that's going on. They're
Mhm.
because they're already like if they're working with me and they're wanting to do deep work, it's like that weeds out the people who don't want
Right.
feedback. But I see a lot like those are more stuff I see kind of in like algorithm stuff where it feeds me videos from YouTube, TikTok, where I'm like, oh, what? Like this is imagine being in a relationship with this person where you're like, this really hurts my feelings. Like, I'm just gonna visualize us happy. And you're like, no, like actually listen to me and be a better partner.
Yeah, yeah, and also it's like maybe, a thing I talk about a lot on this show is like finding your people in a way,
Yeah.
like mostly in the grief realm. Like
Hmm.
this podcast is kind of like, heal your grief,
Hmm.
connect with spirit, manifest a new life in broad
Hmm.
strokes. And
Hmm.
there's a certain portion of that of like finding your people, and your people
Hmm.
can change over the course of your life,
Hmm.
depending. But I also don't want people, when we're talking about healing grief, a big thing is, um, you don't want to get stuck in woundology. You don't want to be
Hmm.
the list of everything you've lost and every. But
Hmm.
anyway, so that's a huge topic. What people's identities are and how we form them over the course of our lives. So
Yeah.
I won't
Yeah.
even
For
I
sure.
won't even touch that. Um, but you did say something that I'm going to just sort of sum up in a more pithy way from your book, which is like thinking everything you see in the world is just like the world is just a big mirror. The world is not
Hmm.
just a big mirror. It's a
Hmm.
little bit more mysterious than that.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's a mirror. Sometimes it's just doing whatever mysterious thing it does.
Hmm.
So it's a
Hmm.
little tricky.
Yeah, again,
So,
it's soul level. Like some stuff's above our pay grade to fully understand or know. Like it's in that doesn't work. Our ego always wants to be like, well, what's the whole picture? Tell me all the steps, like exactly what's going to happen so I can feel safe and secure in this. And soul level stuff is like you don't get to demand what you want to know. Like you can get answers, you can engage, it can be very helpful, but it's like never going to work according to the way the ego's demanding.
mhm. Now I have a note here that I don't now, Katie, you and I booked this interview a couple of months ago.
Hmm.
So I read your book like a
Oh,
couple of
okay.
months
Oh,
ago.
wow. Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah. No worries.
So I have a note here and I seemed excited about it because I put an
Hmm.
exclamation point next to it. Planifesting.
Hmm.
What is planifesting?
Okay. So, yeah, again, some of the capitalist manifesting and some of the things where where I see a lot, again, almost like internet wise, of like what I don't believe in terms of the manifesting part. I talk about the like soul leading it first. So there's a piece of like who's actually in the driver's seat here, and it's not saying you can't have things happen, but those usually don't feel the way you want them to feel, or like they may fall apart or come with consequences if it's like an ego driven forced thing. Um, so I talk a bit about that. The other side of it too can be sometimes there's like, oh, there's a spiritual guidance, or like I have this sense of I should start a business, or I should have a healing practice, or this piece, and then people might just meditate, feel into it, and sit there waiting, or like immediately quit their job. And it's like, whoa, whoa, slow down. Like ego needs to serve soul. These often need to go together, and we need to be open to the journey of it and really developing intuition. Our soul, like soul and intuitive timelines, it's hard to translate those to rational timelines a lot of the time. I mean, I felt that call to explore spiritual awakening, see, like build my practice based on that. But that took years to do. And that was like years of work and training it did not happen overnight. And it
Well,
was decades. Yeah.
also as we talked about, you are a very ethical person and you knew what your obligations were as somebody who's licensed to practice
Yeah.
psychology. So bringing those two together, I'm glad to hear you took your time doing
Yeah.
it.
When even now I'll still get stuff. I mean, even me speaking here, writing the book is for the last few years, I've been getting the sense of I need to like be more visible. Like this needs to get to more people. I need to serve more people in a different way. But there's steps there of like manifesting that in the actual physical world and like not being a burnt out human who also has like a child to take care of, other things where it's like, okay, how do I actually do this in a way that's sustainable for me, that feels good, and I am following this guidance, but it doesn't happen again, that quick fix overnight. Like it's not a failure if you're not, because I see a lot of coaching spaces, places where it's like, oh, I quit my corporate job and now I'm doing this. And you don't see all the behind the scenes stuff. You don't see like, do they have a partner supporting them? What level of privilege are they coming from? What level
Mm,
of resource and access do they already have? Like what groundwork did they do before? Like what are those actual numbers looking like? Is it sustainable? Like, so I think it's just sometimes people can get into trouble where it's like it's again, it's not just one or the other, it's the soul leading, but then the ego's good at being like, how do we like actually set this up in a way that
mm-hmm,
works for us and takes
mm-hmm,
care of us in our day to day, where like we actually do need food and shelter and sleep and
mm-hmm.
finances.
Yeah. You know, when I first came across your book and I saw the title, Toxic Spirituality, I thought that it was going to be just really going at like coaches.
Hmm.
Um, which it's not. That's not
Hmm.
that's not what the book
Yeah,
does.
yeah.
But I will say coaches are a problem because a lot of in my view, I don't know, I want to hear what your take is, but in my view,
Yeah.
a lot of people they have an experience and
Mhm.
that experience is also coupled with I don't think what I'm doing with my career is the right thing.
Mhm.
So I've had this experience, I'm going to be a coach. And there's
Mhm.
a lot of coaches out there and coaching is this completely unregulated space. Like anybody can say, I'm a coach. Now, obviously, if they're going to make a living at it, they have to have some skill at something. And it could
Mhm.
just,
Mhm.
but the thing is, it could just be marketing themselves. It could be nothing beyond that. And I think like the coaching space is kind of a toxic space.
I love coaches. There's like again, I think I pay for coaching. I've had great results with coaches. Like I have worked with coaches. There's definitely times where I'd recommend coaches.
Uh-huh.
But again, I think it's one of these places where I talk in the beginning of the book about like regulated versus unregulated spaces. And
Mm-hmm.
there's kind of a few things on there's I think there's more of a trend of moving into coaching. And so it's again, can people actually have the empowerment they need to make a good decision about who they're working with and recognize
Mm-hmm.
like some of these, there's some really skilled people in these areas, and there's some people who just called themselves that, or maybe took a 10-hour, 100-hour workshop, and that's scary.
Yeah.
The other part, I've seen a trend since the pandemic, and I just see it happening more and more, where I think there's this double-edged sword where socially we are way more informed about mental health. There's more kind of information about trauma. Like collectively, we have more information than ever.
Mm-hmm.
The shadow side or the worry with that is cognitive bias wise, when we have a little bit of information about any subject, we think we know more than we actually know. The more we get into a subject, like the more you actually have degrees in psychology, the or like any other area, the more you realize there's so much here you don't know and that you'll never actually know. So I
Mm-hmm.
think there's also like a collective problem where people are like, oh, like I know this about trauma, and like now I'm gonna start working and I'm a trauma informed, or like, and the part that really scares me is coaches pivoting into talking about treating depression, anxiety, trauma, where I'm like, I don't see anything in your profile that means you're a safe space to work this. I'm not saying you can't be a support to someone who has the right piece, but it's like, do you even know what to assess for? Do you
Yeah.
even know how to make sure you're safe to work with this person? Like, and I talk about that in the red flags of like, do they have a scope of practice? Are they very clear on who they can help and who they can't help? Because if that's not there, this could be very dangerous for the person and the practitioner.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because they're probably well meaning, but pivoting into depression, like there can be high self-injury or like suicidal ideation there. And you need a lot of skill to manage that. You need a lot of skill and experience to filter out what trauma is safe to work with. Like trauma is a huge thing. You have to, in psychology, you have to already be licensed, and then you do advanced training in it. You don't come out, not every psychologist can even work with that. It's
Mm-hmm.
specialized after. And even then you have to be careful. Um, so it's just one of those areas where I'm like, there's positive with it, but there is this shadow side that I don't think is being talked about enough to be like, some of this can be very helpful and you need to be careful.
Yeah. It
Mhm.
just when I think about the coaches, there's a book that was, oh God, I think it was
Mhm.
published almost 20 years ago. I'm not sure. It's by a writer, Tom Nichols. He does a lot of like political TV here, and it was called The
Mhm.
Death of Expertise. And
Mhm.
I think we see that in a lot of spheres. I mean,
Mhm.
like I said, the world's in a strange place,
Mhm.
people running governments that maybe don't have the expertise to run governments,
Mhm.
people you're just mentioning, it's like you're for coaching, but
Mhm.
um, people
With certain people,
with
like there
certain
are
yes,
good coaches there, but then
with
there's
certain
others that
people
are
doing
very scary.
yes, that if
Yeah.
they don't have the expertise to deal with
Yeah.
trauma and depression, there's not really any breaks for it. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, my take on it is it's still got some ways to get worse because
Mhm.
as you said, it's that thing where when you start to really learn about a subject, that's when you realize you don't really know anything about it. And
Mhm.
we're in a world where, I mean, I don't know if TikTok is actually going to get shut down, but there's a lot of
Mhm.
people learning things from 30-second videos on TikTok, and you
Mhm.
can't learn the
In
measure of
depth.
so
Yeah.
many subjects. Exactly. You
The
you
depth
just
and the nuance and the case by case basis.
yes,
Like,
don't
yeah.
even learn enough to know. It gives you that sense. You don't even learn enough to know that you don't really know about it. So
Yeah. And again, it's such a double edge because I think there's like, it is the destigmatization is great. People being more open, like the conversations around mental health. There's
mhm.
really positives with it, but there is this like scary side to it too, where
Yeah.
you could be
And
following someone who doesn't have enough training or working with someone
that's
when you're vulnerable.
and
Yeah.
that's an area in your book too where you talk about the gurus and um like God complex
Mm-hmm.
problems in that can be part of toxic
Yeah, that's when
spirituality.
it gets into the like, because I think there's this piece around it's helpful for any person, whether they're spiritual or not, to know emotional maturity. Can someone self reflect? Like, on the spectrum of emotional maturity, because I do think it's really a spectrum and we're not like fully arrived. There's always it's work I'm still doing. I'm still evolving. I hope I'm even more emotionally mature further along. And I've definitely come a long way from when I was younger. But I think there's the part to see, like, it's not about finding the perfect person who's like transcended all these things. It's more of, can they separate it? Do they know? Are they able to reflect? Do they know what they can work with and hold safe space for? Do they
Mhm.
know when to refer out? Are they doing their own work? like those are the ones who are more safe to work with versus you can get into emotionally immature personalities who have really strong psychic gifts, who are really charismatic. And it may even get into personality pathology where it's like these are high personality disorder traits, or they might
Mm.
actually even have a full blown, untreated, unmanaged personality disorder. And this is very dangerous. The rate of traumatization getting too close to these people, very, very high risk for
Oh, you
vulnerable
mentioned
people.
specifically
Yeah.
that having an ability, if somebody has a spiritual ability, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have integrity. That
Yeah.
these are two very separate things.
Dimensions. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the follow up on that, um, you warn people to look out for, like, and again, this is staying in sort of the guru, mentor,
hmm
advisor realm, the people that promote dependency.
hmm hmm Use fear, manipulation, bullying, dependency. They might give you oh, if you're really serious about this, you'll find the $30,000 or whatever to work with me versus like, and I'm not saying people can't have their rates, but it
Mhm.
should be a very like detached of like whether you work with someone or not and wanting them to get the best support for where they're at and with what their budget is. I don't believe we have to spend more than we can afford to, and there's
I
times when it is worthwhile to invest, but when it gets
mhm.
into bullying, when it gets into like, oh, psychic reading of like, oh, something's terrible is going to happen, like I don't believe in that necessarily. And if people are using fear, promoting kind of that dependency, like, and then blurring the boundaries too, because it's like they're often benefiting from that relationship, and it's
Yeah.
becoming they're taking advantage of people in a vulnerable position, whether they're
And
conscious of it or not. Yeah.
I've seen this happen in two different realms. I mean, I had a good experience where this
hmm
is going back uh, 25 something years. I was in around
hmm
30 and I'd had a medical crisis.
hmm
And I'd been through, like, I was having problems with my back. It was like, it
hmm
was based on trauma that had been stored in
hmm
my body that in my
Yeah.
late 20s was like, you're
Hi.
not suppressing this anymore.
Yeah.
We got to stop you right here. And I had gone to, of course, every doctor, chiropractors and surgeons and injections in
Mhm.
my spine, the whole thing. And finally, I wound up in the hospital. Like, I just,
Mhm.
intraction couldn't move. And a lawyer that I worked with said, why don't you go to this guy that I had just gone to? And this lawyer there, were a lovely guy, had the cutest son in the world. I
Mhm.
remember his little, and who's probably like got kids of his own now. But
Yeah.
anyway, he said he said his back had gone out. The doctor gave him Vicodin, and I was like, that's for me. And it was like, you don't
Yeah.
know, your back went out for one weekend. I'm doing this for years. So I went to this guy, and he was an osteopath who did like
Mhm.
like gentle
Yeah.
osteopathic manipulation
Yeah.
that wound up, I got up off his table and all of a sudden I felt normal. I had not
Yeah.
felt normal in like
Yeah.
3 or 4 years.
Mhm.
By the time I got home, I couldn't walk again. And he was like, explain to me he did some adjustments. My brain was really
Mhm.
pissed off and it went back to
Mhm.
doing what it did. And I had to see him 3 times a week,
Mhm.
which was a lot. And I had
Mhm.
good insurance, but it was still a
Yeah.
lot because he
Yeah.
was in
Yeah.
that area of medicine that wasn't really covered by insurance so
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
But the thing about it was, Katie, after, I don't know if it was after 6 months or so,
Mhm.
like I was like feeling better. I knew that his treatment was really helping me.
Mhm.
He
Mhm.
said to me, you know what? You need to see me a little less.
Mhm.
Like, you're doing okay.
Mhm.
And then another few months after that, he said, I really don't want to see you that often. I want you to actually try. And he recommended another person. He said, why don't you try shiatsu with her?
Mhm.
You can
Mhm.
do her. He told me to stop coming in,
Mhm.
which
Mhm.
was, in a way, it can be an unusual. On the
Mhm.
other side of it, like I
Mhm.
remember when my sister, she started studying jujitsu,
Mhm.
and just at a little dojo. And
Mhm.
there was a whole culty thing that went
Mhm.
on there with
Mhm.
everybody revering Sensei Joe, who ran the
Mhm.
place. And she had to come more and she had to pay more and she had to sign up for more.
Yeah.
So it's, yeah, exactly. And I mean,
Yeah.
exactly. And that thing, and that's where I think of like, yeah,
Yeah, and
the
if you
whole,
want to, great. Like if there's people there doing that, but if it's this like pressure and everybody's
yeah.
got to drink the Kool-Aid, like that's where it gets ick. It's not about that there's people who really love this and are getting a lot and going all the time. It's
Hmm.
that like you're expected to do this and there's something wrong with you if you're not, or like this should be your path. That's the ick.
Yeah, and and
Yeah.
and it's important to like I said, I was lucky that I had that experience where just out of the blue, my
hmm
osteopath said, "You know what? Time to pare back."
Hmm.
You know, like I was learning how to hold my own energy and manage my
Yeah.
own body better. And that
Hmm.
was a great gift but a lot of like my sister, you know, so many people have had that experience. So
Hmm.
it is a flag for
Yeah.
sure.
And it's just like, I think I want people to have those reflection questions because you're vulnerable and you're looking for community. You're looking to someone to mentor
Mhm.
you. There's a power imbalance kind of that can happen and is often a part of those relationships. So it's
Mhm.
so heartbreaking and it can be such a betrayal or even traumatizing for people when it's like this person they trusted and gave like access to their energy, like then actually now manipulates them or
Yeah,
then starts gaslighting them and making this conditional and wanting more and more from them. That's like really icky.
and I also feel too, it's that normal thing where, like I say, you have to find your own people, but
Hmm.
sometimes you wind up in a spot where it's like, oh, I thought I found my new people. And
Hmm.
it's like, no, that was just a stop on the way. You still got to
Yeah.
journey a little
And
further
sometimes
down the
it's
road.
Yeah, sometimes it's part of that development for ourselves too, because I know I've seen this with some clients and for myself personally with with one kind of unregulated teacher mentor early in my journey, I got to the point where I was like, I want nothing to do with you. Like I'm keep all my money. I am not finishing this. I want no association. Um, but it was for me, it was a real point of like not putting someone on a pedestal, being like, yeah, they are internationally recognized. They have all this psychic gift that I like really admire, and I'm like, wow, that's so beyond mine. But it was like, no, my own knowing knows more for
Mhm.
me around like this is right, this is true, this doesn't feel good or right for me. The dynamics I'm seeing here, it's like, yeah, they have all the skill, there's stuff to offer, but there's all this imbalance where they're not doing their own work and addressing their stuff that it's like, no, just trust that you don't need them. Like sometimes it is like kind of a quote unquote dark teacher where it's like, if we engage in our own process, we come out more empowered. Not saying what
Yeah.
they do is right or okay, but
Yeah. Absolutely.
hmm.
Um, yeah, you have to, yeah, if you can, learn how to take what you can learn from that person
Hmm.
and move
Yeah.
on.
And I mean, now I have a book to be like, I want people like this to not get away with this in the same way. And people have the support they deserve.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I have to say from the point of view in some ways of these people who are doing this,
Mhm.
I get how um seductive it can be and how easy can be when people are just giving over
Mhm.
their energy.
Mhm.
And their but yeah, I'm sorry, it's
Yeah,
triggering off
again, a lot
another
of times I don't think people a lot of times I don't think it's intentional or malicious. I think there's a small percentage where it probably is. It's probably very small, but I think a lot of time it is people's own like their own ego wounds, their own
Yeah.
shadow stuff, the stuff they haven't addressed and that they're not
Mhm.
addressing enough that then starts running this of like this fear, like they're not
Yeah.
connected to that light enough within themselves to say. Because again, when you're connected to that higher self, it's like that source is your source. It's not like each client of like, how do I get everything from them? And I won't have
Yeah.
enough if I'm not doing this. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Katie, I did want to ask you about your how your mediumship developed. Now, separate from your
Mhm.
psychological practice, your psychology
Mhm.
practice. So how did this start? Like, what was your first experience? What did you then do to
Yeah.
develop more?
So,
Because I just before I
mhm.
let you answer that, I want to thank you. I want to
Mhm.
and I want to say what you
Mhm.
said about the mediumship connection because I thought it was like the most pithy right on way to say it where you talked about because I've had some experiences since my sister's
Mhm.
passed over where you talked about it being like a spotty cell phone connection. Like it doesn't
Mhm.
change the grief and the loss because it's not the
No.
same. But I was
Yeah.
just like, yes, that's exactly what it's like. It's like there's
Yeah.
communication there, but it's not like reliable or clear
And they're not in
as if
front
they
of
were
you. You don't
there.
get to hug them and you don't get to do stuff with them. Like you can feel them and you don't always get to control when that call's coming through when it's cutting in and out.
Yes.
Like, so it's like there's definitely comfort in that, but it's like if someone you love moved halfway around the world and all you're going to have is spotty Wi-Fi, you're like, that's really, you're still going to grieve them.
You are. But I thought like
Yeah.
that is exactly what it's like. Like, thank you. So anyway, so how did
Yeah.
it start for you and how did you develop it more?
Yeah, for me, it's really tied into my whole awakening journey. It's like a thread of the abilities that opened up. So for me, that started opening up when I spent about a year in India and Nepal, really do like meditation, exploring energy work, breath work, like having a ton of space there where I
Mhm.
wasn't working, where I wasn't in school.
And what
And
year
in
was
get
this? What
Oh,
year
what
was
year
this
was it?
about?
2010 or 11, I believe.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right.
So a while ago. Yeah,
Okay.
that's kind of what opened up that whole spiritual side for me. And I was already in psychology.
Hmm.
So now in hindsight, I know in terms of opening up intuition, because I think we don't get to control what our abilities are. Like we can explore them, but people seem to have natural ones that come through or not. Some people it's mediumship, some they get connection with their guides, some they may just have a feeling or knowing.
Hmm.
So I'd say for anyone wanting to develop it, it is about where are those spots in our day to day where we can get out of our rational mind and be more just in the moment when that knowing can come through.
Hmm.
I also have a free quiz on my website about like what's your dominant feeling type because that's the one when we know what sensory gateway our intuitive information comes through. And I talked a bit
When you
about
say feeling,
yeah,
when you say feeling type, are you talking about the clairs or are you talking
the
about
clairs.
feeling? Okay, so the clair. Okay.
Yeah, like the vision, the
Yeah.
auditory, the feeling, the just knowing. Those are ones we can then kind of meditate and pay attention to that.
Okay.
And when we know our dominant gateway, we often want a different gateway. Like, I want a message or I want it to come this way, but it's like it comes the way it comes. So the more we can reflect on that, figure out which one is dominant for us, the more we kind of intentionally meditate, intentionally practice with that one. The other ones kind of just start opening on their own in their own way. And
Hmm.
I used to think, when I
So
started out,
what was your dominant one that opened
empathic,
first? Okay.
empathic, yeah, clairsentient. And I work with, it's one of my specialties now. I'm like, this one sucks. You don't get to choose it. Like if you got to choose it, I wouldn't have picked this one in this culture and society growing up with it. I think it's changing with kids who have parents who are more open and conscious and aware of these energy dynamics. But
Well, you also said that clairsentient people, especially clairsentient people, need to know how to ground and like clear
yeah,
out all
yeah,
that
yeah.
stuff.
It can become a gift. I love it now. And
Hmm.
I'm not as empathic as I used to be now. It's not dominant for me anymore, but I've worked very hard with
Really?
that because I didn't want it to be. And so I also I do a lot of depth work, subconscious work, inner child healing work. So I worked on shifting it because it's still there, but it's not as dominant for me anymore because
So
I've built more of
what's
like,
dominant for you now?
it comes in all of them basically. Like they evolve and change over time. So I'll get dreams like I mean when I'm working with people and they're coming to me for that reason, I have that consent. I'm working with psychology tools, but I'm also listening with my entire intuitive abilities. So it's like I'll see things, hear things, get messages, get information and we can co-work with like what is coming up. So it can get to the root of things where um it can just help guide that process to be like, where's the energy need to be released here? It's never overriding clients' own experience and it's
Hmm.
helping them connect with their own intuition as well. But for me, yeah, it was when I came back to Canada, there was a number of years where I was kind of in the spiritual closet exploring those abilities and then working in mental health, like kept that very separate.
Hmm.
And so there was an intuitive development workshop I went to where it was doing different experiments with people you don't know with the different
Hmm.
clairs and
Hmm.
the the empathic ability like that was like a light switch moment. It still really stands out to me today when I realize like working with different people I didn't know and describing like this is what I'm feeling in my body from okay now this is hurting, the pain's radiating from here, like this is what the injury feels like to like this is how my heart feels, the emotions, and then that would change dramatically and instantly with someone else. And also getting the feedback from people who are strangers to me of like, I mean, one of it freaked this woman out where she was like, I'm done. Like, I don't want to work anymore. Because it was just
So,
so, she's like, it's like you looked into my soul and that was a lot. And I was like, so,
so did you feel you had this ability though before you went to the workshop? So you
I
felt that something
realized
was
I
going
did,
on?
but I had no idea up to that moment. Like,
So until you started
yeah.
just reading people cold that you'd
Hmm.
never met and they were validating what you were saying,
Hmm.
that was like really the first experience you had where you were like,
Yeah, it
yep.
was a light bulb moment to be like, oh, like this, something's actually happening here. It's very subtle, it's internally, but then right after that, on the heels of that, was like, how long has this been happening for me? And I think
Mm.
that's a limitation with just Western psychology that treats us as these separate consciousness of like, it's just me with my individual thoughts in my individual brain. That it's like, no, we're connected to this field. Like, we have our inner child, we have this like ancestral piece. And if we have different intuitive abilities, a lot of the, for my work as as an empath and empathic clients, if we just are treating every emotion like it's ours to process, we're never going to stop processing. Like we're some for empathic
Mhm.
people, it's like we have to first be like, is this even mine or not mine? If it's not mine, it's not mine to process. It's not mine to like cry about, journal, keep moving through. Cause like the world has a lot of stuff to process. Like we're never going to
Yeah,
stop doing that. I don't believe
right.
we're here to like absorb the collective suffering. But sometimes that can lead to a doorway to be like what belief system, what childhood experience, like what parts of me are taking this on. And so I think
Mhm.
there's a balance of like protecting, grounding, like clearing and protecting our energy and also
Yeah,
like deeper healing work. So we're kind of sealing up some of those energetic doorways where we're taking on too much at a metaphor I'll use is almost like a healthy cell membrane. The cell membrane protects the cell from just whatever's floating around in
right.
the rest of it. Like there's receptor cells where some comes in, some goes out, but there is a separation within the
Mhm.
organism. And when we're empathic, it's almost like we don't have an emotional membrane. We'll get it right to our heart. We'll be processing it. We might process it for people we love. Like we can be more distressed by their pain than they are. Like they're just not doing anything. We're like, like yeah, I need you to feel better so I can feel better. And it's not codependency in the traditional psychology sense because energetically, like we're taking it on. So unless we can detach from that or like still, again, still hold space, still love them, but not feel it more than they're feeling it.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
a,
You also, I think, bring up something too, where it's like we haven't spoken about this, the problem of time,
hmm
like the construct of time. If you're picking up on somebody's stuff, if you're feeling their
hmm
stuff, not only is it maybe not your job to process it, but it's like, is it or is it old stuff that they're carrying around? Like, how old
hmm
is this stuff that they're carrying around? The reason I say this is just like I
hmm
was having a conversation with my mother yesterday, and it was like going over in a way old family stuff,
hmm
stuff that nothing can be done about. And I
hmm
wasn't being dismissive about it. It's stuff that we've
hmm
spoken about and processed and
hmm
discussed repeatedly. And it's like when you're talking about too, like, people who have been deceased and deceased for
hmm
years,
hmm
they're not suffering whatever you're even talking about. They're
They
not
can be though. They can be with the mediumship style because it's there. And I think the part is the difference is for the individual, and this is just the way I approach it or the way I've learned to work with it for
Mhm,
myself and what I've seen can be helpful is
mhm,
if you as an individual are actually taking it on. If you're like,
right.
this energy is with me, it's not shifting, it's
Mhm,
affecting me, there's usually something there for us to be like, it doesn't just attached to everybody. There's a
okay.
reason it's there. There's something of like what part of me is allowing this in, what's familiar here, like where is the energetic kind of opening or weak point? Like what is this here to show me almost? Like it's ultimately for me, but there may be some healing work to do. Not to process it all for them, but sometimes there's like this might lead to an inner child part of me or belief system that will be helpful for me to shift and then that energy may not be gone, but it's not in my bubble anymore. For me, with the mediumship ability, it started to open up with the rest of the abilities. So I would get things about like people's day, what's going on, like really clear detail that could be confirmed. So that like that was really confirming to my rational mind, like there's something here
Mhm,
that's really true. Um, then I'd see, experience, have things about different points in their childhood, things that were said to them, like different key moments that had a lot of energy. And then again, like I wasn't sharing these with people directly, but I'd get the confirmation of like what they sense or experience. Same with kind of like past life stuff, and then things with like other energies or kind of spirits medium coming through. So like
mhm,
and the tricky part with mediumship abilities, it's like these are people. These are people who have lived, who have passed on. They can either be showing up to help, like the dream like you had is very common where it's like, I'm okay, I love you, don't worry. Very peaceful, I'm
yeah,
gone. Like and
yeah,
that's just very healing. It feels very good. It's very loving. Sometimes they're showing up because they like want to help you, but it's like any
mhm,
relative who loves you and wants to help you. Like we all have maybe that great aunt or someone who like wants to give you advice about don't do this
mhm,
or that. And you're like, thank you. Like that is totally based on your experience and your belief systems and like thank you but no thanks, and people can get into trouble when they're like, oh, this person showed up so I need to break up with them or I need to make this decision or like I need to be really scared. It's like, nah, they mean well, but you don't take all advice in every area from every member of your family. So just because they've crossed over doesn't mean they've worked through all their stuff. like sometimes they actually need help, or like they're holding on to old belief systems or old
Okay, let's
emotions. Yeah.
this is interesting, Katie, because this is different than a lot of the conversations I've had. So
Hmm.
I tend to, and I mean, by all means, push back on me.
Hmm.
I tend to think that, like my sister, for example, had a borderline personality disorder.
Hmm. Hmm.
She died, it's almost 12 years ago. One of
Hmm.
the things I was relieved about, and it
Hmm.
also could be based on like the kind of contact I had with her, that she was
Hmm.
not suffering from that personality disorder in the
Hmm.
same way, that she had
Yeah.
been relieved of it, that
Hmm.
I have not been under the impression that like
Hmm.
that some of the psychological problems that people may have in this life, like
Hmm.
I told you, my mother and I were talking about my
Yeah.
grandmother who was a narcissist.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't think she's particularly narcissistic anymore. But you're
Yeah.
saying
Yeah.
your experience as a medium is that some of that stuff, I guess, beyond maybe
It's different
psychological
for every
complexes,
soul. Like
but
it's
medium, like
individual.
the
Yeah.
energy can still be the same. I mean, and because I will say
Yeah.
that most mediums, I mean, I don't know that there's one medium
Hmm.
that doesn't report that people's energy is still people's energy, whatever the consciousness is, that there's
It can
something.
change and evolve, and it's individual for each. Like, and again, this is just my experience. It's more
Mhm,
like if it's more the transpersonal psychology that can like hold a framework for this, but
mhm,
and again, I have enough faith in it because I've had it through like practice, through sessions, through clients where it's like there's no way I'd know the level of detail and they can confirm all of it. And
uh-huh,
so I think there's the part where yeah, like some people, it's different for every individual. Like some, like what I think once we're are free of this physical aspect, it's like then the time space is different. It's like that soul can transition very quickly into light, love, beautiful space. So, but
mhm,
they can also get stuck in this kind of limbo space where they don't realize like they're still holding a lot of the emotions. There's not as much time gone by. If people get into like haunting spaces or like this piece that doesn't feel good. It feels like heavy, scary, sad. This is like that's usually more of a stuck. And sometimes they're a bit both in between. Like they're good, but then they're like, oh, I'm worried. And this, it's like, oh, you still got like a layer here
mhm,
coming up. And again, how that's going to impact each individual, like here in the physical, is very different because not everyone has mediumship abilities. Not everyone's like path is to learn through some of that. So
yeah.
some people have different energetic boundaries already where it's like they might get the love part, but like the other stuff is not affecting them at all.
Mhm. But
Mhm.
as a medium, what's
Mhm.
your experience though is that a lot of spirits you've had contact with are still working through. This is stuff
It's
that they
both.
were
I've had
working through
experience
you.
of all the spectrum. Like sometimes it's they can come through and it's like super beautiful. They're there to support. It's loving, like they're in a great place. Other
Uh-huh.
times it's and again, I'm not like a me just a I'm not a medium. I have mediumship abilities as a like psychologist who works with transpersonal. So I'm also working with people who are like doing deeper work for themselves. So we're usually working on how to connect more with that higher self aspect as well as like how to clear out the old stuff that's getting in the way
Mhm.
and how to develop those abilities. So that type of work comes with more of like, oh, interesting. There's like ancestral stuff here, or there's some energy here that's you are picking up on. There's something here, but it's not yours to carry or heal for them. Like we can help them, we can help bridge them. Because I think that intuitive, again, we're not their guides. Like we're having a human experience. We may be able to call in help for them and be like, who or what can help them. We might be able to help shift it in our
Mhm.
kind of family epigenetic ancestral field.
Mhm.
But we're not, it's not like we have to do the same level of work for them that we would do if it's our own personal trauma. It
All
might be
right.
like a session or two and they're moving on.
How would you separately define, if you would, like ancestral fields and generational trauma?
It's very similar, except it's like generational trauma can exist within the ancestral field, but so can all the gifts and the love and like
Ah,
ancestral holds everything, whereas the generational trauma is just one aspect of it, of like this started somewhere back and now it's rippled out in terms of the epigenetics. It's like oftentimes with it's like our parents did the best they could. If they were raised by a narcissist, like that is going to infuse their parenting. Like each
yeah.
generation, like it does. Sometimes it's like there's a part of it that's our individual. We're working with our inner child, but it's like it didn't start with us. It didn't even start with our parents. It goes back. And when you
Yeah.
get into that intuitive realm, sometimes we need to work with just loosening up enough of the energy that the individual themselves can start to be more free of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
It doesn't have,
Um,
yeah.
I just it's just something that I know. I ask about this too because I have a friend who I can see very clearly is dealing with like generational trauma, and
Mhm.
I look at the energetic patterns in my family.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, I'm 56. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
I'm sort of well past looking at like what my father did and what my mother
Mm-hmm.
did, because if you look further back, you can see, like I will
Mm-hmm.
say for my parents, I'm not saying everybody's parents are like
Yeah.
this, but it's not like my parents didn't give anything that they had. It's
Yeah.
just what
Yeah.
they couldn't give, what they didn't have, that they didn't
Yeah.
get from their parents, that didn't get from their parents, that,
Yeah.
and you don't have to go too far back for people to have been living, not everybody's family, but I mean,
Yeah.
I had like poor farmers not too
Mm-hmm.
far back there who's just like trying
Like
again, trying.
survival, just
Yes,
survival. Yeah.
exactly. When you're
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
survival mode all the time,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
there's not, you can't expand in the other ways. It's just not
Yeah.
how it worked like
No, no.
150 years ago.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So
And even now for people who are still in survival now, like, yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So Katie, I'm going to ask you sort of the lightning
Mm-hmm.
round of questions, the final questions that I ask all
Okay.
my guests, if that's okay.
For sure.
So what does a well-lived life look like to you?
Yeah. I think it is more of a whole, like a whole life in all the areas too. So, again, in that capitalistic side of things, we're so conditioned to just go after success, like more and more and more. It's more the, okay, where is the purpose, the passion? Like, how do we create that in the world? Have good relationships, have moments, like have those times where we can come back to peace, connection, um, those deeper values and
Uh,
and relationships. Yeah.
yeah, other people.
Community. Yeah.
What do you suspect is the true nature of reality? There's a lot to cover here.
Yeah, I don't think I don't know if our human minds can ever fully understand it, but I do. My experience of it is I think there's that soul level where it is all loving, all connected, everything's all good, and we're also experiencing like the human reality too.
Yeah.
Like that's how we're filtering it, and that's what we got to work with as well.
Yeah, the paradox.
Mhm.
How do you think people can take care to be better connected to their soul or their consciousness?
Yeah, just recognizing that it's real. Like it's not woo, it's very real. There's science that backs it up. It can be very helpful and valuable, starting with having some time for it. You don't have to take off for years or anything like that. It might be 5 or 10 minutes in the day, like just getting out of that thinking mind, being open to exploring, like, how does that come through for you? Developing that ability over time, thinking of it like a muscle that the more you practice it, the more it's going to come through.
Mm,
Finding those people and communities where you can talk about it or develop it that are those safe spaces because it
yeah.
develops over time. Yeah.
When you die,
Mhm.
what do you hope to learn or find?
That's a good one. Yeah, I feel like I've had glimpses of it already. So it's like, it'd be cool to go through. And I hope that like in the process of dying, that I'm just very peaceful and excited for like going back home there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I have to tell you, it's a funny thing that happened to me. This is a few years ago. I was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, but like the run
Mm-hmm.
up to it was really bad. It was during the
Mm-hmm.
pandemic, and my diagnosis was delayed, and I was bedridden, and then I was in a wheelchair. And I mean,
Mm-hmm.
for some months there, I was very close. I was close to death. Like it was because of
Mm-hmm.
the delay. We did not know that was what was going on. And it made me so curious
Mm-hmm.
about crossing over and what's on the
Mm-hmm.
other side. And it took some time for me to realize that no, you're still here. You better keep staying invested.
Yeah.
Like you're still
Not
in
done yet.
you're still in your body. So don't totally like detach where you become like all I see is what's over, what's next.
Yeah.
Because for now, I'm still here. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm with you in that feeling of like, I hope it's a peaceful transition whenever it happens,
Mm-hmm.
but I have a curiosity,
Mm-hmm.
like through your mediumship experiences, I'm sure you do too, where it's like, something interesting is over
Mm-hmm.
over there. And so do I, and so do many people. And it's a little anyway, but
Yeah.
we're still here, got work to do, whatever the
Yeah.
responsibility is. So
For sure.
speaking of work to do, so
Mhm.
where can people find you and the good work that you do?
Yeah, my website's probably the best place. It's katieturnerpsychology.com.
Okay. I love it
Yeah.
when it's one-stop shopping.
Yeah, well, the quiz is there. There's a free like 6 week challenge with the journal exercises for people to like deepen their own intuition and have that like accountability container. They can find out more about the book.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And do you have any final thoughts for the audience today?
Yeah, just thanks for listening. And I'd also encourage people to reflect on, was there anything that kind of pinged for them that they even wanted to pull up this episode or find your podcast? Because often there is those little guidance of like, hey, like there's a feeling and energy that might
Follow up
already be
on
guiding
that.
you. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Katie Turner, for being on the show today.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for watching. Click to join us on another journey, and don't forget to subscribe.